poor tiny girl helped a limping native child across the river. Next day, 40 warriors knocked at her door. The 40 warriors stood in perfect silence outside Willa's cabin, their faces painted with symbols she had never seen before. Not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. They simply waited. Willa pressed her back against the wooden door, her heart hammering so hard she was certain they could hear it through the walls. Yesterday, she had helped a lost child cross the river. Today, an entire war party had found her. But something was wrong with this picture. Warriors didn't travel in perfect formation just to threaten a 12-year-old girl. They didn't bring ceremonial feathers for a simple confrontation, and they certainly didn't kneel. Yet that's exactly what the leader did. One by one, all 40 warriors dropped to one knee in the dirt outside her door. The man in front held something in his outstretched hands, something that glinted in the morning sun like metal, but felt significant in a way that made Willa's skin crawl with recognition. She had seen that object before, yesterday, in the hands of the limping child she had carried across the rushing water, the child who had whispered something in a language Willa somehow understood, despite never hearing it in her life. The child who had looked at her with eyes that seemed far too old, far too knowing. The child who had vanished into the forest without looking back, leaving only wet footprints that led to nowhere. Now Willa stared through the crack in her door at the kneeling warriors, and one terrible realization began to form in her mind. The child she had helped wasn't just any lost native, and these warriors weren't here for revenge. They were here because she had done something that changed everything, something that broke a rule she didn't even know existed, something that meant she was no longer the orphaned girl living alone by the river. But what she had become, that was the question that made her hands shake as she reached for the door handle. Willa's fingers trembled as she turned the wooden latch. Through the narrow gap, she could see the lead warrior's weathered face, marked with blue and white paint that ran in precise lines down his cheekbones. His eyes weren't filled with anger or threat. They held something far more unsettling. Respect. The kind of respect reserved for equals, not 12-year-old orphans living in rotting cabins by the river. She opened the door wider, and the morning air carried the scent of leather, horses, and something else. Something ceremonial. The warrior in front slowly rose to his feet, and Willa had to crane her neck to look up at him. He stood nearly twice her height, with broad shoulders that blocked out the sun behind him. In his cupped hands lay a silver pendant, intricately carved with symbols that seemed to dance in the light. "You helped my daughter cross the river," he said, his English careful but clear. His voice carried the weight of mountains. "You carried her when she could not walk." Willa's throat felt dry as sandpaper. The limping child had been his daughter. Not just any child, but the daughter of what was clearly a chief or leader of significant importance. She remembered the moment yesterday when she had spotted the small figure struggling at the water's edge, her left leg dragging behind her, tears streaming down her dirt-stained face. She was hurt, Willa managed to whisper. "I couldn't just leave her there." The chief's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Behind him, the other warriors remained kneeling, their eyes fixed on the ground. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, and Willa realized that whatever she had done yesterday had consequences far beyond a simple act of kindness. "My daughter told me what you did," the chief continued. "How you waded into water that reached your chest. How you carried her across when the current tried to sweep you both away. How you asked for nothing in return." Willa nodded, remembering the terrifying moment when the river had grabbed at her ankles, threatening to pull them both under. The child had been heavier than she looked, and Willa's arms had burned with the effort of keeping them both above water. But she had also remembered something else, the way the child had looked at her afterward, with those knowing eyes that seemed to see straight through to Willa's soul. "She also told me," the chief said, extending the pendant toward Willa, "that you spoke to her in our language." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Willa stared at the silver pendant, her mind racing back to yesterday. She remembered comforting the crying child, whispering reassuring words. But she had spoken in English, hadn't she? She had always spoken only English, the language her parents had taught her before they died. Yet now, with the chief's words hanging in the air, fragments of memory began to surface. Words that had felt natural on her tongue. Words that the child had responded to with immediate understanding. Words in a language Willa had never learned, but somehow knew. The chief stepped closer, and Willa could see her own reflection in the polished silver of the pendant. For a split second, she could have sworn she saw something else looking back at her. something that explained why 40 warriors had traveled through the night to find her. Something that would change everything she thought she knew about herself. Willa's mind raced back to yesterday afternoon, when the sun had been burning hot, and the river ran faster than usual from the mountain rains. She had been washing her only dress in the shallows when she heard the crying. Not the normal sounds of forest animals, but the desperate sobs of a child in pain. She had followed the sound downstream until she found the girl collapsed on the opposite bank, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle, blood seeping through torn deerskin. The water between them had been treacherous, filled with rocks and debris from upstream. Most adults would have hesitated, but Willa had seen the fear in the child's eyes, the way she kept looking over her shoulder as if something were chasing her. Without thinking, Willa had plunged into the current. The crossing had been a nightmare. The water grabbed at her like hungry hands trying to drag them both downstream toward the rapids. The child had wrapped her arms around Willa's neck, whispering words that somehow soothed the panic rising in Willa's chest, words that felt familiar, like half-remembered lullabies from a dream. "You said, 'Be strong, little sister,'" the chief told her now, his eyes never leaving her face. "You said the ancestors watch over us. You spoke these words in Lakota, a language my daughter has heard since birth, a language no white child should know." Willa's legs felt weak. She gripped the doorframe for support as the chief's words sank in. She remembered saying something to comfort the girl, but the exact words had felt automatic, instinctive, like breathing, like they had always been there, waiting beneath the surface of her conscious mind. "I don't understand," Willa whispered. "I've never learned any other language. My parents only spoke English." The chief's expression softened slightly, and for the first time, she saw something that might have been pity in his dark eyes. Behind him, several of the kneeling warriors exchanged glances, as if they knew something she didn't, something that explained why they had traveled through the night to find her. "Tell me about your parents," the chief said gently. "Tell me how you came to live alone by this river." Willa's stomach clenched. She had spent 3 years trying not to think about that night, the fever that took her mother, the way her father had sat by the river for days afterward, staring at nothing, how he had stopped eating, stopped speaking, until one morning she woke up and found him gone. No note, no goodbye, just gone. "They died," she said simply. "I've been alone since I was 9. The chief nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already suspected. He turned to one of the warriors behind him and spoke in rapid Lakota. The warrior rose and approached, carrying a leather bundle that he set carefully at Willa's feet. "My daughter also told me something else," the chief said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "She said that when you carried her across the river, you sang. An old song. A mourning song that only the women of our tribe sing for the dead." Willa's world tilted again. She had sung. She couldn't remember singing. But even as she tried to deny it, fragments of melody drifted through her mind. Low, haunting notes that seemed to echo from somewhere deep in her bones. The chief gestured toward the leather bundle at her feet. "There are things you need to know about yourself, Willa. Things about where you really came from. Things about why your parents brought you to this river and why they never told you the truth." He paused, studying her face with those penetrating eyes. "But first, you must choose. You can stay here, alone with your questions, or you can come with us and learn who you really are." Willa stared down at the leather bundle, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. 3 years of living alone had taught her to be cautious, to trust no one completely. But something deep inside her chest was pulling toward these strangers, toward answers she had been too afraid to seek. "What's in there?" she asked, pointing at the bundle. The chief knelt down and carefully unwrapped the leather ties. Inside lay several items that made Willa's breath catch. A small dress made of soft deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns of blue and white. A pair of tiny moccasins, worn but well made, and at the bottom, a daguerreotype photograph that made the world spin around her. The photograph showed a young native woman holding a baby. The woman's face was serene, beautiful, with the same dark eyes that Willa saw in her reflection every morning. But it was the baby that made her legs give out. The baby had light hair and pale skin, and around her neck hung the exact same silver pendant the chief had been holding. "Your mother," the chief said quietly. "Your real mother. Her name was Ayana, which means eternal blossom. She was my sister." Willa's hands shook as she picked up the photograph. The woman in the picture looked nothing like the pale, sickly woman who had raised her until age 9. This woman looked strong, proud, alive. But my parents were white. They told me I was their daughter. They were good people who loved you, the chief said. But they were not your blood. When you were barely walking, raiders attacked our winter camp. Many died, including your mother. In the chaos, you disappeared. We searched for months but found no trace. We thought you had been taken by the raiders or killed. The chief gestured toward the photograph. Your mother made this pendant the day you were born. She said it would always bring you home to us. We never stopped hoping. Willa's mind reeled. Everything she thought she knew about herself was crumbling. How did I end up with the people who raised me? We believe the couple who raised you found you during the attack. Perhaps you wandered away in the confusion. Perhaps they found you lost and afraid and took you in as their own. They gave you a good life, Willa. They loved you. But they could never give you the truth about who you are. She looked up at the 40 warriors still kneeling in her yard. Why did you all come? Why so many? Because, the chief said, his voice heavy with emotion, you are not just my niece. Your mother was a medicine woman, a healer of great power. The daughter she bore was prophesied to return when our people needed healing most. We have been waiting 12 years for you to reveal yourself. Willa felt dizzy. I don't know anything about healing. I can barely take care of myself. Yesterday, when you carried my daughter across that river, you did more than save her life. You showed the courage and compassion of your mother. You spoke our language because it lives in your blood. You sang our songs because they are part of your soul. The chief stood and extended his hand toward her. My daughter's leg was badly broken yesterday. Our healers said she might never walk properly again. But this morning she woke up and ran to tell me about the girl who saved her. Her leg had healed completely overnight. Willa stared at him, her mouth dry. That's impossible. Is it? The chief asked. Or is it simply something you don't understand yet? The 40 warriors rose as one, their eyes fixed on Willa with a mixture of hope and reverence that made her stomach churn with responsibility she wasn't ready for. Whatever choice she made now would change everything. But as she looked at the photograph of her real mother, she realized that everything had already changed the moment she decided to help a limping child cross a river. Willa looked around her tiny cabin, at the few possessions that had been her entire world for 3 years. A wooden bowl her adoptive father had carved, a faded quilt her adoptive mother had sewn, a small knife for cutting kindling, everything that remained of the life she thought was hers. Now it all seemed to belong to someone else, someone who had never really existed. If I come with you, she said slowly, what happens to me? What happens to this place? The chief followed her gaze around the small room. This cabin will remain. If you choose to return someday, it will be here. But Willa, our people are in great trouble. A sickness has spread through our camps, one that our healers cannot cure. Children are dying. Elders who have survived wars and famines are growing weak. We need someone who can bridge 2 worlds, who understands both the old ways and the new. Willa felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. What if I can't help? What if I'm not who you think I am? Then you will have tried, the chief said simply. And that is more than we have now. She picked up the small deerskin dress from the bundle, holding it against herself. It would probably fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all these years. The beadwork was exquisite, each tiny bead placed with care and precision. She could almost imagine her real mother working on it by firelight, stitching love into every thread. Your name, the chief said, your real name, is Wakanda. It means mystical power, but power that comes from within, from understanding and compassion, not from magic or spirits. Power that comes from knowing who you are and choosing to help others. Willa tested the name on her tongue. Wakanda. It felt foreign and familiar at the same time, like a song she had heard in a dream. Will I see your daughter again? The girl I helped? Ayana is waiting for you at our camp. She has been asking for her rescuer since dawn. She wants to thank you properly. The chief paused. She also wants to show you something. Something about the river crossing that even I do not fully understand. A new mystery. Willa realized that no matter what she chose, there would always be more questions, more secrets to uncover. But for the first time in 3 years, she wouldn't be facing them alone. I need to pack, she said quietly. The chief nodded. Take only what matters to you. We have clothes, food, shelter. What you need now cannot be carried in your hands. Willa moved through the cabin, selecting the few items that held memories worth preserving. The wooden bowl, A letter her adoptive mother had written to her father. A small stone from the riverbank that she had always thought was pretty. As she gathered these remnants of her old life, she felt something shifting inside her chest. Not fear exactly, but anticipation mixed with a strange sense of homecoming. Outside, she could hear the warriors preparing for travel. The sound of leather creaking, horses snorting softly, quiet conversations in Lakota that her ears were beginning to pick up individual words from. Words that made sense without her understanding how. When she emerged from the cabin with her small bundle, the chief was waiting with a horse. Not a war pony like the others rode, but a gentle mare with kind eyes and a soft mouth. "She was your mother's horse," he said. "Her name is Wikapi, Star. She has been waiting for you as long as we have." Willa approached the mare carefully, extending her hand. The horse whickered softly and nuzzled her palm, as if recognizing something familiar. As Willa swung herself onto the horse's back, she felt a connection she had never experienced before. Not magical, but deep and natural, like coming home after a long journey. "Are you ready?" the chief asked. Willa looked back at her cabin one last time, then forward toward the unknown path ahead. "Yes," she said, and meant it. But as they began to ride toward the forest, none of them noticed the figure watching from the ridge above. A man with cold eyes and a rifle who had been tracking the war party since dawn. A man who had very different plans for the girl they called Wakanda. The forest path wound deeper into the mountains than Willa had ever traveled. The warriors rode in a protective formation around her, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line for threats she couldn't see. Chief Dakota rode beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about her mother that felt like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their places. Ayana was fearless, he told her, as they navigated a narrow trail along a cliff face. She would climb the highest peaks to gather healing plants that grew nowhere else. She said the best medicine always required the greatest risk. Willa gripped her reins tighter as Wikapi picked her way carefully along the rocky path. "What kind of sickness is affecting your people? You said your healers couldn't cure it." The chief's expression darkened. "It started 3 moons ago. A fever that comes and goes, leaving people weak and confused. But it is not like any sickness we have seen before. It affects only certain families, certain bloodlines, and it seems to be spreading in a pattern that makes no natural sense." "What do you mean?" "The families that are getting sick are all related to our medicine people. The healers, the plant gatherers, the ones who keep our traditional knowledge alive. It is as if someone is deliberately targeting those who preserve our ways." A chill ran down Willa's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Do you think someone is poisoning them?" Chief Dakota was quiet for a long moment. "There are men who would profit if our people became weak and desperate. Men who want our land for the gold they believe lies beneath it. If they could eliminate our healers and force us to depend on their medicine, their traders, their way of life." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Willa understood the implications. "And you think I can help stop this?" "I think you may be our only hope of understanding what is really happening. You know both worlds, Wakanda. You think like them, but your heart belongs with us. You might see something our healers have missed." As they rode deeper into the wilderness, Willa found herself remembering skills she didn't know she possessed. She noticed which plants grew in which types of soil, which animal tracks indicated fresh water nearby, which bird calls meant danger approaching. Knowledge that felt instinctive, inherited, as natural as breathing. "How far is your camp?" she asked. "We will reach it before nightfall. But Wakanda, there is something you must know before we arrive. Our people have been waiting for you for 12 years. They have built their hopes around your return. Some believe you are the answer to all our troubles." Willa felt the familiar weight of expectation settling on her shoulders again. "What if I disappoint them?" "Then you will disappoint them," the chief said simply. "But you will do so honestly as yourself. That is all anyone can ask." They crested a ridge, and the chief suddenly raised his hand, signaling the party to stop. In the distance, smoke was rising from what should have been empty forest. Too much smoke for a normal cooking fire. Too black for wood burning cleanly. "That is coming from our camp," one of the warriors said urgently. Chief Dakota's face went pale. "We are still 2 hours away. That smoke should not be visible from here unless—" He didn't finish the thought, but Willa could see the fear in his eyes. "Unless what?" she demanded. "Unless something is burning that should not burn. Unless someone has attacked while we were away." The chief spurred his horse forward, and the entire party broke into a gallop. As they raced toward the rising smoke, Willa couldn't shake the feeling that their journey to find her had been deliberately timed, that someone had wanted the warriors away from camp for exactly this purpose. Behind them, on the ridge they had just left, the man with the rifle lowered his spyglass and smiled. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. The smell hit them first. Not just wood smoke, but something acrid and chemical that burned their nostrils and made the horses snort nervously. As they thundered down the final slope toward the camp, Willa could see figures running between the lodges, some carrying buckets of water, others dragging belongings away from the flames. The medicine lodge, Chief Dakota breathed, his voice filled with horror. They burned our medicine lodge. The structure that had been the heart of their healing traditions was now a blackened skeleton against the sky. Warriors and women worked frantically to prevent the fire from spreading to the other dwellings, but Willa could see they were fighting more than just flames. The smoke carried an oily, unnatural quality that spoke of accelerants deliberately poured. As they rode into camp, people rushed toward them, their faces a mixture of relief and terror. An elderly woman grabbed Chief Dakota's horse by the bridle, her words tumbling out in rapid Lakota. Willa found herself understanding more than she expected, catching fragments about strangers, threats, and something terrible that had happened to the children. "Where is Ayanna?" the chief demanded, dismounting quickly. "Safe," the woman assured him, "but others are not. The sickness struck again during the night, harder than before. 3 more children fell ill, and old Noatak collapsed and has not woken." Willa slid down from Wikapi's back, her legs unsteady from the hard ride. Around her, the devastation was worse than it had appeared from a distance. Not only was the medicine lodge destroyed, but someone had trampled the healing gardens, scattering precious plants and roots across the dirt. Months or years of carefully cultivated medicine had been ruined in a single night. "This was not an accident," she said quietly. Chief Dakota nodded grimly. "Someone wanted to ensure that even if we found you, we would have no traditional medicines left to work with. No plants, no prepared remedies, no sacred space for healing." A small figure broke away from a group near the remaining lodges and ran toward them. Ayanna, the girl Willa had carried across the river, moved with no trace of the limp that had marked her yesterday. She threw herself into her father's arms, then turned to look at Willa with eyes that sparkled with recognition and gratitude. "You came," Ayanna said in clear English. "I knew you would come." "How is your leg?" Willa asked, kneeling to examine the girl's movements. "Yesterday you could barely walk." Ayanna flexed her leg experimentally. "It stopped hurting after you carried me across the water. The swelling went down during the night, and this morning it felt completely normal." Willa frowned. A sprained or twisted ankle might heal quickly in a young person, but the injury had looked more serious yesterday. Still, children were resilient, and she might have overestimated the severity and the stress of the moment. "Can you show me the sick children?" Willa asked Chief Dakota. "I want to see their symptoms myself." He led her toward one of the larger lodges, but before they could enter, a shout rang out from the forest edge. One of the warriors who had stayed behind came running toward them, his face flushed with urgency. "Chief, we found tracks, boot prints, not moccasins, and something else." He held up a small glass vial, empty but still reeking of chemicals. "We found several of these hidden near the water source." The pieces clicked together in Willa's mind with sickening clarity. "Someone has been poisoning your water supply. That's why the sickness affects only certain families, why it follows a pattern. They're targeting specific groups deliberately." Chief Dakota's face hardened into a mask of controlled rage. "And now they have destroyed our traditional remedies to ensure we cannot treat the poisoning ourselves." "But who would do this?" Ayanna asked, her young voice filled with confusion. "Who would hurt children?" Before anyone could answer, a rifle shot cracked through the air, and splinters exploded from a wooden post just inches from Chief Dakota's head. On the ridge above the camp, Willa could see the silhouette of a man with a rifle, and her blood ran cold as she realized that everything that had happened had been carefully orchestrated. The man who had been watching them was no longer content to observe, and whatever he wanted, it was worth killing for. Chief Dakota grabbed Willa and pulled her behind the nearest lodge as another rifle shot splintered the ground where they had been standing. The warriors scattered, taking defensive positions while shouting orders to get the women and children to safety. Willa's heart hammered as she pressed herself against the wooden wall, her mind racing to understand what was happening. "Who is that?" she gasped, pointing toward the ridge where the shooter waited. "Marcus Brennan," Chief Dakota said grimly, checking his own rifle. a land speculator who has been trying to force us off this territory for 2 years. He claims there is gold in these mountains. Another shot rang out, followed by a voice that carried clearly across the valley. Chief Dakota, I know you can hear me. Send out the white girl and we can discuss this like civilized men. Willa felt ice form in her stomach. The man knew exactly who she was and why she was here. He's been watching us, he knows about me. More than that, the chief said. He orchestrated everything. The poisoning, the timing of our journey to find you, the destruction of our medicine lodge. He wanted to ensure we would be desperate enough to hand you over. But why does he want me? Chief Dakota's expression was grim. Because you represent hope to our people. As long as they believe you can heal them, they will stay and fight. But if you disappear or die, they will lose faith and abandon the land he wants to claim. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Brennan hadn't just been poisoning the tribe's water supply randomly. He had been targeting the healers and medicine people specifically to create desperation. Then he had waited for them to seek out their legendary lost daughter, knowing they would leave the camp vulnerable while they retrieved her. How many men does he have? Willa asked. Unknown, but he's been planning this for months. The chemicals in those vials, the way he knew exactly when we would be away from camp, the systematic destruction of our medical supplies. This is not the work of one man. Ayanna crawled toward them from another lodge, her face pale, but determined. Father, I can see movement in the trees behind him. At least 6 men with rifles. Willa closed her eyes, trying to think. 7 armed men against the warriors who remained in camp. The odds were not good, especially with sick children and elders to protect. But there was something else bothering her. Something about the way Brennan had called out to them. He said he wanted to discuss this, she said slowly. That means he doesn't just want to kill us all. He needs something from us. He needs witnesses to report that we were attacked by hostile natives, Chief Dakota said bitterly. Dead men tell no tales, but survivors can be made to tell whatever story serves his purposes. Willa felt a cold determination settle over her. 3 years of living alone had taught her that sometimes the only way to survive was to take risks that seemed impossible. What if I go out there? What if I talk to him? Absolutely not. Think about it, she pressed. He went to all this trouble to get me here. That means I have value to him alive. If I can get close enough, maybe I can learn what he really wants. Chief Dakota studied her face, and she could see him weighing the terrible choices before them. And if you're wrong, if he simply kills you, then you fight without me. The same as you would if I stayed hidden. Willa looked toward the ridge where Brennan waited. But if I'm right, if I can buy you time or information, maybe we can find a way out of this that doesn't end with everyone dead. Ayanna grabbed her arm. Please don't go. We just found you. Willa covered the girl's hand with her own. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust someone else to be brave too. She turned back to Chief Dakota. I'm going out there, but I need you to promise me something. What? No matter what happens to me, you find a way to get those chemical vials to someone who can identify the poison. Someone in the white settlements who can create an antidote. Your people don't have to die from this. Chief Dakota nodded slowly. You have your mother's courage, Wakanda, and her stubborn refusal to consider the possibility of failure. Willa stood and stepped away from the protection of the lodge. Let's hope I also have her luck. Willa walked slowly toward the center of the camp, her hands raised but her mind sharp and focused. Marcus Brennan descended from the ridge with 3 of his men, their rifles trained on her, but their faces showing a confidence that made her stomach clench. He was a large man with cold gray eyes and the kind of smile that never reached beyond his mouth. Miss Willa, I presume, he said, stopping about 20 feet away. Or should I say Wakanda? I've heard so much about you. What do you want? Willa asked, keeping her voice steady. Simple business transaction. You see, I've invested considerable time and money in acquiring this land. The problem is, these people won't leave voluntarily. But if their prophesied healer were to disappear, or better yet, publicly renounce them and join civilized society, well, that would solve my problem nicely. Willa felt her anger building. So you poisoned children to force them to need me. Brennan shrugged. A small amount of mercury in their water supply, easily treatable with the right medicine, but fatal if left alone. I'm prepared to provide that medicine in exchange for your cooperation. And if I refuse, then the children die, and I tell the territorial authorities that I was forced to defend myself against a hostile tribe that was holding a white girl captive. Either way, I get the land. But Willa had been listening to more than his words. She had been watching his men, noting their positions, their weapons, their confidence, and she had noticed something Brennan had missed. While he was talking, Chief Dakota's warriors had been moving, quietly, carefully using the smoke from the burned lodge as cover. "There's one problem with your plan," Willa said loudly, making sure her voice carried. "The chemical you used isn't just mercury." Brennan frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I lived with white people for 9 years. I know about industrial chemicals because my adoptive father worked in mining. What you put in their water is mercury mixed with arsenic and lead compounds. That's why it's affecting people so strangely, why it targets certain families but not others. Different people have different tolerances to different metals." She took a step closer, gambling everything on her next words. "But here's what you didn't know. Those metals accumulate in the body, and when they reach critical levels, they become deadly to anyone who's been exposed, including you and your men, who have been drinking from the same water sources for weeks while you watch the camp." The lie came smoothly, confidently, and she saw doubt flicker in Brennan's eyes. "That's impossible." "Is it? When did you start getting headaches? When did your hands start shaking slightly? Look at your men, Brennan. Really look at them." 2 of his men glanced at each other nervously, and Willa pressed her advantage. "The only antidote is a specific combination of plants that grow in these mountains. Plants that only the tribal healers know how to prepare. Plants that you destroyed when you burned their medicine lodge." "You're lying." "Am I? Are you willing to bet your life on it?" In that moment of doubt, Chief Dakota's warriors struck. They rose from concealment on 3 sides, surrounding Brennan's group with rifles ready. The land speculator spun around, realizing too late that his careful plan had unraveled. "Drop your weapons," Chief Dakota commanded, his rifle aimed at Brennan's chest. The fight was over before it began. Faced with certain death, Brennan's men threw down their rifles and raised their hands. Brennan himself stood frozen, his face white with rage and fear. "You have 2 choices," Willa told him. "Help us identify exactly what chemicals you used so we can treat the poisoning properly, or take your chances with territorial justice when we turn you in for attempted genocide." 3 hours later, the captured vials had been sent with 2 warriors to the nearest trading post, where a doctor could analyze them and send back proper treatment. Brennan and his men sat tied under guard, their plans shattered by a 12-year-old girl who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon was information used at exactly the right moment. As the sun set over the mountains, Willa sat beside the campfire with Chief Dakota and Ayanna, finally understanding what it meant to belong somewhere. She was no longer the lost orphan by the river, nor was she simply the mythical returning healer. She was Wakanda, who had found her place by choosing to fight for the people she loved. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and destiny collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.